Our series Unprecedented, and I want to kind of set it up just a little bit and tell you a little bit about, kind of what birthed this series and where it all came from. Whether you're, a church person or not, regardless of your background, your socioeconomic status or your race or your political beliefs or whatever it may be, regardless of any of that, all of our differences, I think all of us can agree that 2020 has been a little bit weird. Like, it started off a little bit bizarre. I would even call it unprecedented. And so I think before we go any further, we need to define that word. Some of you may not even know what that word means. Unprecedented means that it's never been done before or it's never been known. So we don't really know what to expect because we've never been through something like this before. And for me, 2020 is unprecedented. This global pandemic, this coronavirus that we're going through is just unprecedented. And I know there's a little pushback, and some of you would say, well, there's been things before. There's been the Spanish flu, and there's been the plagues, and all those things. And that's true. You're right. That those have been there, and they're in the past, and there's nothing new under the sun to God. But for us, for our generation and our culture and our society, we've never been through this before. It's completely unprecedented. I mean, I never thought I would see the day where churches were closed. Did anybody think you would see that? Have you ever thought about that? Like, we're in times that we've never been through before. We've never lived through anything like this before. It's completely unprecedented. And so when I begin to think about that in terms of our society and our culture today, it's not that different from when Jesus came down to earth. Because Jesus walked into a religious system that said you had to follow these rules and you had to do all these things just right, and you can only do certain things and certain things at a certain time of the year and this and that. And Jesus comes on the scene, and he's completely unprecedented. He begins to say things and do things that had never been said or done before. And it was just so radical that it changed the culture. It changed the society completely. He was unprecedented. And so in this series, we're going to look at some of the things that Jesus said and some of the things that he did that were countercultural and that were unprecedented. But going back to 2020, let's go back to us really quick. This global pandemic, this COVID-19, and how things are so much different. And it's unprecedented. I mean, you've had all these government mandates and shutdowns, right? Like, they've shut down businesses and restaurants and barber shops. They've shut down city parks and state parks and all those things. They've even closed churches, shut down churches and things like that. All these shutdowns. The jobless rate has soared, right? If you weren't considered an essential worker, you were sent home, and some of you were just laid off indefinitely. The stimulus package, the government gave us all money, the working class people. Isn't that unprecedented? Did anybody think that they would live to see the day where the government just writes you a check and puts it in the mail? It's unprecedented. A lot of you are working from home now. That's different. You're working on a computer screen 7-8 hours a day rather than face-to-face with another person or another team. Homeschooling, right? That's unprecedented. Any homeschoolers in here? Raise your hand. That's completely unprecedented. If nothing else good comes from COVID-19, I think we'll all have a better appreciation for teachers. Can you guys agree with me on that? Anybody? Yeah. And I know you all are out there, and you're going to send your kid back to school next year, and you're going to sign that form that says you can't paddle my child. How many of y'all have changed your tune on that one? You're going to rip that form up. You're going to be like, you better paddle him. He gets out of line, you better paddle this kid. You better put him in suspension or expel him from school, because it's different. It's unprecedented. We're going through uncertain times. We do church online now. We have virtual meetings with Zoom or Teams or whatever app you choose. It's just different. And I think the biggest thing that sticks out to me is just how uncertain it is. There's all the uncertainty. We don't know. There's so much unknown. And sometimes that fear of the unknown can lead to panic. Panic can cause us to lose focus. And sometimes when we lose focus, it leads to hopelessness and despair. And in times of uncertainty, we desperately want answers, don't we? I mean, think about that in terms of, like, if you get hurt or if you have to go to the doctor and they have to run some tests. What's the worst part of it? Waiting for the answers, right? The most uncertain time is when you're waiting for the results. And your mind can run to so many different things, and you begin to think the worst case scenario, and all that stress and strain can lead to panic, and you can lose focus, and you can become hopeless and be in despair. But we want answers. What's going on? What is this COVID-19? How long is it going to last? When will it end? I mean, they're saying, maybe we can get through June, or maybe we get through July or August. They're saying maybe it's going to come back in the fall. It's so uncertain. But we've got questions. Where is it safe to go? Can I go to Walmart? Can I go to the grocery store? Can I go to the ball field? Do I need to wear a mask? Do I not need to wear a mask? Is it okay to go to church? Is it safe? So we've got all these questions. Why is this happening? Are we being punished? Is this God's wrath being poured out on us? Are these the end times? Or is this just a strain of a flu that we've never known before, a virus that we've never known before, and we're trying to learn how to get through it? There's so much uncertainty. How will we ever recover? How will our economy ever bounce back? But for me, the number one question in all of this, in all of these unprecedented times, the number one question for me is, who can I trust? Who can I trust? Think about that for just a minute. In these last few months, who do you trust? Do you trust Fox News or CNN? Do you trust Trump or the Democrats? Are you going to trust social media, what people put on Facebook and Instagram? Are you going to trust China and their numbers and their results? Who do you trust? Are you going to trust the experts that they put on the screen? They've got a doctor one day that says one thing, and the very next day they put another expert on the screen that says something completely different. And sometimes it's hard to know who to trust in these uncertain times. But I'm going to tee it up for you. I am going to lob it up to you today, because this is church, and you guys know the right answer in church is always one answer. And so who do we trust in these times as believers? Who do we trust? That's right. You guys got it. Jesus. And so if you're a note taker and you're taking notes today, I'm going to put the title up here on the screen, In God We Trust. It even says that on our currency, on our money. Like, I've got a quarter here, and if you look on this coin, I know you guys can't see it because it's really small, but if you look on this coin right behind George Washington's ponytail, that's pretty cool. George is rocking the ponytail like way back when. It says in really tiny letters, In God We Trust. It's even on our money. It's on our currency. We say that, we proclaim that on our money. Something we handle each and every day. But do we really trust? Do we really put our trust in God fully? Do we really trust Him fully? Because that's a lot easier said than done. And I can't stand up here on the stage and tell you guys and judge you for not trusting and not having faith. I can't say you need to trust Jesus more and you need to have more faith and trust God more, because that would be hypocrisy on my part. Because sometimes when I'm in times of uncertainty and doubt, I have trouble trusting Him too. So I can't stand up here and tell you you need to have more faith, but what I can tell you is listen to God, because He tells us that in His Word. And He tells us that in Proverbs chapter 3 and verse 5. He says, it's going to be up on the screen. It says this, trust in the Lord with all your heart. Do not depend on your own understanding. Trust in the Lord with all your heart, which means completely trust Him in everything. Trust in the Lord with all your heart and lean not on your own understanding. So who can we trust? We can trust in the Lord. But that's hard, because we all have trust issues, don't we? We're human. Each and every one of us are human, and we have trouble trusting sometimes. And trust has to be earned. It's got to be earned. You wouldn't just trust a perfect stranger, would you? So if I were going out of town on vacation, I wouldn't just grab some completely stranger that's walking by and say, hey, my family, we're going out of town. We're going to be gone for a couple of weeks. Would you mind house sitting for me? I know you don't know me, but, I'm not crazy. Would you come in and house sit for me? And, my neighbors, they're not really around much, so you'll be okay. They won't bother you. And there's a stash of money we keep underneath the mattress. And if you get in trouble, need anything, I've got some guns in the closet. Do you mind watching my house for a couple of weeks? No, I wouldn't do that to a perfect stranger. Trust has to be earned. And what I know about trust is when it's broken or we feel betrayed by those that we trust, it takes time to heal. It's a process. It takes time for us to trust again. Anybody in here ever had their heart broken? Anybody? Yeah, my hand's up. And what did that feel like? It took time for that to heal, and it took time for you to be able to trust someone again. So trusting is a lot easier said than done. But here in God's word, he says, trust in the Lord with all your heart. Completely trust in the Lord. And I know some of y'all are thinking, is this going anywhere, John? Are we ever going to get to scripture or a story? Yes, we are. We're going to be in Matthew chapter 14 today. If you brought your Bibles, we're going to be in verses 22 through 33. If you didn't bring a Bible, it's okay. It's going to be on the screen and you guys can follow along. But we see this story. It's a familiar story. Whether you, like I said, whether you grew up in church or go to church a lot, or whether this is your first time in church, you've probably heard about this story at least once or twice in your life. It's where Jesus walks on water. And Peter also walks on water. And so we're going to look at that today. It's this story of trust where both Jesus and Peter walk on water. And Peter has to put his trust in Jesus. And that's completely unprecedented when you think about it. A man walking on water, that's something that had never been seen or done before in history. And so we pick it up in Matthew 14, verse 22, and this comes right after Jesus had just fed the multitude. So he'd fed over 5,000 men, women, and children, and so he sends his disciples out on the lake, and we see here. Immediately after this, so after he performed the miracle feeding the 5,000, Jesus insisted that his disciples get back into the boat and cross to the other side of the lake while he sent the people home. After sending them home, he went up into the hills by himself to pray, and night fell while he was there. Meanwhile, the disciples were in trouble far away from land, for a strong wind had risen, and they were fighting heavy waves. So a storm blows up on the water. This is not anything uncommon. It's not unprecedented. These guys, most of these guys, fished for a living. They'd been in storms before. This was nothing new, not unprecedented. And about 3 o'clock in the morning, Jesus came toward them walking on the water. Now that is unprecedented. If I'm in the boat, I'm thinking, whoa, what is that? What's happening here? I've never seen anything like that before. And when the disciples saw him walking on the water, they were terrified. In their fear, they cried out, "It's a ghost!" So they're terrified. They've never seen anything like this. They've never experienced. They probably never even heard of anything like this. It's completely unprecedented. Jesus comes walking toward them on the water, and they're terrified. Not to mention they're in the middle of a storm and the waves are crashing around on the boat. And in verse 27, we see what Jesus says. And I want us to see, he says 3 things here. Jesus spoke to them at once. "Don't be afraid," he said. "Take courage, I'm here." Now that's a short verse. There's not a lot in that verse, but there's so much in that verse. There's so much packed in those 2 lines. Jesus says 3 things to those disciples, and I believe he says the same thing to you and to me today. Regardless of whatever storm you find yourself in, he shows up and he says 3 things. He says, don't be afraid, take courage, or be encouraged, I'm here. That's so simple. It's so simple, but it's so profound. Don't be afraid, be encouraged, I'm here. And I believe he's speaking that into your life today. Not just in a sermon from some guy up on a stage. I believe when you leave here in whatever storm you may find yourself in this week, Jesus shows up in the middle of that storm and he says, don't be afraid. Take courage. I'm here. I'm with you. He wants you to hear that today. He wants you to know that today. That he cares for you and he loves you so much that he'll show up in the middle of your storm and be there for you. And what's the response? What's the reply to that? In verse 28, then Peter called out to him, "Lord, if it's really you, tell me to come to you walking on the water." I love Peter. I love him. Don't you love Peter? Because Peter speaks up here. He's always bold and kind of jumping in. And he says this, if it's really you, I can identify with that. I believe that's where most Christians live today. Honestly, I believe that's where most Christians are at today in their walk with Jesus. Jesus speaks to him, and we say, but is it really you, Jesus? I mean, I thought I heard you right, but is it really you? If it's you, show me a sign. Like, give me a sign. Confirm it to me, Jesus. And that's what Peter's saying here. Lord, if it's, Jesus spoke plainly. He didn't stutter. And then Peter says, but Lord, if it's really you, just give me a sign. Tell me to walk on the water. Don't miss this. Peter's asking for a miracle. He's asking for something completely unprecedented. God, let me walk on the water. That's miraculous. Miraculous. He's asking for something that had never been seen or done before. He asked for a miracle.